In the story of Icarus, a man creates a set of wings made from wax and feathers, and his son Icarus uses the wings in an attempt to escape from a king who holds him and his father captive. In his escape, Icarus disregards his father's word and flies too close to the sun, resulting in the wax melting, Icarus falling to his death and drowning at sea. In this video, I would like to address some of the critiques surrounding MBTI and typology, talk about how some of them may be well-founded, and how others may completely misunderstand the entire study. So I use the story of Icarus as a metaphor to illustrate one of the most fundamental objections to the study, one that is a potential barrier to entry for many people who would actually enjoy learning more about typology. The objection is towards the concept of predisposition. Now, before I explain the relationship of predisposition to the story of Icarus, or what exactly the critiques are, let me explain what predisposition itself is. So predisposition is just the fancy way of saying preference. This concept is commonly represented with the idea of handedness. Most of us, either upon birth or very early on in our childhood, develop a natural tendency to rely on one hand over the other. This has a direct parallel with behavior and cognition, and the similarity lies in the fact that while we can learn to use our opposite hand, it never feels quite natural, and we always end up reverting back to our dominant hand in unknown territory. To use an example of how this parallels cognitive personality, imagine a person who is extremely agreeable. This person is encouraging, polite, friendly, probably says yes whenever people ask him for help. But in situations where it would be better for this person to be disagreeable and stand up for himself, it becomes difficult for him and feels unnatural. In the realm of personality, we can observe how everyone seems to have innate abilities that just come out of nowhere and can't be explained. Some people are good with people, some people are natural artists, some are mechanics or understand physics, just like that, seemingly without trying. So the objection may be clear now. It seems that MBTI perpetuates stagnation, prevents growth, and suggests that people are who they are and they're never going to change. The way I see predisposition is like gravity, that, as in the story of Icarus, is constantly pulling man back towards the earth. That is to say that it may not feel natural for man to fly, or to use the hand opposite his dominant, but through the correct means, we may be able to overcome our natural inclinations and become more balanced humans. MBTI is a great tool for bringing awareness to our shortcomings. Typological models help us more clearly see ourselves and take part in a process called individuation or integration, whereby we learn how to become the best versions of ourselves. So in order for us to go against our nature, the theory would suggest that we need to go through this integration process. And what that means is that we have certain tendencies or cognitive functions, which we prefer, and in order for us to balance ourselves out, we need to integrate the opposite function. So for example, the agreeable person, extroverted feeling, would need to find balance through a dependence on their own ideas, introverted thinking. The point that I'm trying to demonstrate is that, yes, there is a danger in going against our nature, but it's important for us to balance that with our own personal growth, if done the right way. A philosopher friend of mine put it well when he said, Icarus flew with fake, mechanical wings, which led to his ultimate downfall. True integration takes place when we grow our own wings. So, that being said, anyone can do anything. You can be a mechanic, a public speaker, a guitar player, a code writer, or all of the above. The psychological type is concerned with what feels most natural for you. What do you feel compelled to do? Another common critique of MBTI is the seemingly impossible idea of simplifying the entirety of human experience into merely 16 different types of people, when there are billions of people with different backgrounds, educations, cultures, religion, etc. I think this critique is very fair. If we take this idea literally and say there are only 16 types of people in this world, and say every ENTP is going to be exactly like the next, that's absurd. But let me reframe it. MBTI does not suggest that two people of the same type will be exactly like each other. It is because of our environmental factors, our cultural upbringing, our education, and all of these other things that make us distinct that we are individuals. And this is why it doesn't make any sense for people to get caught up with what is a rare type and what is a common type, because there is no person in the world that is exactly like you. The only thing a personality model does is it shows us our similarities, and in this way, it allows us to connect more deeply with our neighbors. Although no two individuals will be carbon copies of each other, two people of the same type will have very similar approaches to life, thought patterns, things they say, how they say them, strengths, weaknesses, beliefs, values. Anyone can do anything. I truly believe that. It just depends on how much conscious effort you have to put forward in order to achieve it. So, as far as similarities are concerned, let's just use the previous example of the ENTP. This type is generally well known for its ideational capabilities and its desire for novelty. What this means is they are generally really good at playing the devil's advocate, thinking quickly, problem solving, things of this nature. But while these positive traits tend to get grouped together, they do come at a cost. That is the exact opposite of all of these characteristics. Practicing patience, settling on ideas, living in a routine and predictable way. These are things that they must devalue. That is, if they don't practice integration and balance their functions, like we mentioned earlier. And everyone's personality lives on a continuum, just like colors. If I asked, most people would say that my hair is red. But what about an apple? Well, they're both red. They just occupy different areas within the domain of redness. Some people who may be younger or less integrated may appear more like the stereotypical ENTP. And some may rely more heavily on functions other than their dominant function. Maybe they prefer to use their extroverted feeling function over their introverted thinking function. But we can still attribute to them certain traits based on cognition that put them into the very broad category of ENTP. Another critique might be, why do we need to label people at all? Doesn't this take away from the uniqueness of every person? Well, besides the idea that it helps us to recognize what we can improve on in life, labeling the human experience is a very widely accepted phenomenon in other respects. I mean, consider how prevalent the notion of introversion versus extroversion is. Yet we all know that not every introvert is exactly like every other introvert. That's because what these models do is they provide a set of characteristics that tend to be grouped together and create an archetypal character that we can more or less identify with. But this begs an even deeper question. Why label anything? Why use terms like introvert or extrovert at all? And the reason is because labels make communication much simpler. Imagine I want to describe my friend to you, and I say, well, they're very energetic and they love to debate and they have all these crazy ideas. They hate waiting in line and they never finish a project and they can't be quiet and sometimes they eat Cheetos for dinner. That's a lot. But instead of that, I could just say, yeah, my friend is an ENTP. I can't wait for you to meet them. Or from there, I could expand and give you even more specific details about their personality. But at least you have a base idea of what they're like. Also, labels facilitate quickness of thought. When we use concepts to understand anything in life, it simplifies and distills many complex ideas into a single entity. Take, for example, the process of learning language. We learn our first native language, not through words, but conceptually. Then, later on, we learn words and apply them to the concepts as labels. Imagine if every time you had to think of the word chair, for example, you had to say, the thing made of wood with 4 legs and a place for you to sit. This is a difficulty for many people trying to learn a new language, as they try and translate a concept from their native language to their new language and then apply a label to it, instead of using conceptual thinking as the basis of their thought process. Simply put, labels are important because they facilitate communication and thought. It is commonplace in our society to believe that personality traits are acquired and not part of biology, that essentially nurture decides everything, not nature. This takes a hit at the possibility of predisposition, and I'll admit I'm not 100% convinced that all of our cognitive personality traits are set in stone from birth, but more experts like Manolis Konelis, a leader in genome study at MIT, are beginning to acknowledge the biological links in personality. In an interview with Lex Friedman, Manolis Konelis says,
and if all of the variants associated with personality, with cognition, and all aspects of human behavior were weak effect variants, then kids would basically be just averages of their parents. But what we see is that kids are dramatically different from each other. So that basically means that in the context of that common variation, you basically have rare variants that are inherited in a more Mendelian fashion that basically then sort of govern likely many different aspects of human behavior, human biology, and human psychology. But the fact that siblings can differ so much in their personalities that we observe every day, it can't all be nurture. Like, again, as parents, we spend enormous amount of energy trying to fix, quote unquote, the nurture part. They're just born differently. As a geneticist, I have to admit that there's only so much I can do with nurture, that nature definitely plays a big component.
In fact, studies have shown that twins who have been separated at birth exhibit more surprisingly large large similarities in personality in comparison with two non-biologically related children raised in the same household. The study suggests not only that there is a correlation between genetics and personality, but also that what can be assumed to be genetic predispositions to cognitive preference may have more influence over human behavior than external factors imposed on the mind like child rearing. What Manolis talks about here is the concept of reciprocal determination, whereby our personalities are shaped by our predispositions, our behavior, and our environment. These three factors act in a continuous loop, influencing and reinforcing one another. Here's an example. Imagine a person who is predisposed to being shy or anxious in social situations. Because of this, the individual may avoid social interaction. This avoidance affects the environments that they find themselves in such a way that they prevent themselves from developing social skills, receiving feedback, and eventually overcoming the social anxiety that they feel. This leads to a reinforcement of the original personality trait, and the whole process repeats itself in a cycle. So where do these predispositions and personality traits originate? We could conclude that early childhood has a strong impact on behavior. That would be right, but the following question arises. Why do certain environmental factors during childhood have a stronger impact on one person compared to another? Even if we assume that these traits are not biologically determined, we're still left in a situation where our thoughts affect our behavior, which affects our environment, which then circles right back to our thoughts in a never-ending cycle until we begin the process of integration. That being said, leading genome experts have already located the existence of gene variants that have a direct correlation to personality concepts like openness and conscientiousness, which are components of the Big Five. Not to mention Dario Nardi's research on MBTI, revealing different primary brain patterns which correlate to Carl Jung's cognitive functions. What I'm implying is that if sufficient research was done, I see no reason why, with all of this information in mind, it is impossible to imagine genes that determine predispositions to brain patterns, which are then reinforced by our environment and create behavior. One of the biggest complaints about MBTI is its inconsistency. The source of this critique being so-called experts who criticize the model because there have been analyses where individuals have taken the test multiple times and gotten different results. So the first thing I want to say is this. If I take the same math test twice in 1 week and I get different scores, is it because the test is messed up or because I didn't know the answers well enough? I will wholeheartedly admit that self-administered personality evaluations are flawed. How can they not be? I mean, we're biased humans, especially towards ourselves. It is very difficult to see ourselves clearly. Therapy exists for this exact reason, to better understand ourselves, because it's that difficult. And I'm gonna do a video on this topic later. But this is why I give credit to apps like Personality Database for democratizing type selection. If 99% of people who vote on Personality Database conclude that Ryan Reynolds is an ENTP, that just proves that we're all seeing the same patterns, and the MBTI is just the tool to help us express them. Another issue is that these experts are only judging the test itself, not doing any research surrounding the cognitive theories put in place by Carl Jung. I mean, except for Dario Nardi, these researchers only know the surface dichotomies of MBTI, that is the IE, SN, TF, JP dichotomies, and nothing about the actual cognitive function theory. And the only way for real research to be done on the model is for people to take it seriously. There is a danger in trusting people who don't know what they're talking about. The appeal to authority works until you realize that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Not only is phrenology fake, but slavery is immoral, and facts only go so far in explaining how the universe works. There comes a point where you have to trust the theory based on anecdotal evidence. In the same vein of credibility as consistency, many people claim that MBTI consists of descriptions that are just mere generalizations relevant to any human experience, like astrology or palm reading, that rely on tactics like cold reading or the Barnum effect. All of these false generalizations cause people to fall for the Barnum effect. When they realize that they've been fooled, it causes them to have a bad taste in their mouth towards MBTI, and they associate it with astrology. Not realizing that, unlike astrology, real MBTI is based off of observations of the intersection of thought processes and behavior, and not the other way around. And this is all a result of fake MBTI media. Websites like 16 Personalities, which ironically use the Big Five model, writing vague descriptions on their websites, and social media accounts that just post memes, and none of it ever relates to cognitive functions. Now, I will say that there's some truth to the archetype descriptions, but it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all perfectly scenario. And because of these fake websites, people start to believe that MBTI only gives generalized, happy profile descriptions, not sharing their negative side, when anyone who's gone down the MBTI rabbit hole realizes that this couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, even some of the fake websites show type weaknesses on their profiles. There is a certain irony in following up the dangers of an appeal to authority with an appeal to authority. The only reason I'm doing this is because I know that some of you will not take this as credible unless you believe that someone who matters is out there using this. But with that being said, many people claim that MBTI is not credible and that it does not produce real results. Yet so many companies and organizations use it. I know of countless companies that use MBTI for their hiring process or for team building. I mean, even the CIA uses MBTI to create behavioral profiles on sources that they want to run operations on.
There's 1,000 different ways of looking at personality. The only one that I count with any significance is the MBTI. And the MBTI is what all the leading spy agencies around the world use as well.
Well, that's kind of interesting to hear.
Oh, yeah.
There's been criticisms of that kind of test.
There have been criticisms for a long time.
Yeah, and you think there's value?
Absolutely, absolutely. And here's a few reasons why, right? So first, MBTI makes the claim that your core personality doesn't change over time. That's how it's calibrated. And one of the big arguments is that people say that your personality can change over time. In my experience, the MBTI is exactly correct. Your core personality does not change because your core personality is defined as your personality when all resources are removed. So essentially, your emergency mode. We can all act a little more extroverted. We can all be a little more empathetic when we have tons of time and money and patience. When you strip away all of that time, money, and patience, how empathetic are you? How much do you like being around other people? How much do you like being alone?
All this to say that there are many big names that still find some kind of benefit from using these models. Now, I will criticize these organizations for using MBTI the way that they do. This is a dangerous practice that can only lead to a negative outlook from third-party individuals. Especially if the consulting isn't done right, how are you going to know what people to put on a team? MBTI is not a perfect personality model. The test is inconsistent. Many mainstream MBTI social media outlets make oversimplifications and generalizations about an extremely complex topic, that is, personality. But the utility of MBTI cannot be denied. It helps us understand other people, it helps us understand ourselves. And sometimes we have to question whether or not, because of the nature of human awareness, whether we will ever have a self-administered personality test that gives us consistent and accurate results. I am currently attempting to consolidate some of the existing theories and conduct some research into the field of typology. And if you would like to know more about this study, please take a look at my first video. Thank you so much if you've made it this far. If you liked the video and you think that MBTI should be more commonly accepted, please like, subscribe, and share the video. It really helps put the word out there. If you think that I missed anything or that my comments don't hold water, please let me know in the comments below.